Hey you guys, this is Professor Vitt and this is our second review video for political philosophy. We're just working our way through the study guide. Hopefully this one takes hold. This is the third time I've done this. For some reason the program is saying my hard drive doesn't have any space, but it has plenty. So let's get through this. As usual, I'm going to cover these pretty quickly and in a pretty straightforward manner. So if you may need to rewind a couple of times in order to get down what I'm saying. If anything I say here is unclear or seems contradictory, or you just want to follow up, feel free to tweet me or email me, or call me or come by my office. Okay. Number 11, what is the disagreement between Glaucon and Socrates? Your answer must include the specific distinction between intrinsic good and instrumental good. Okay, so this is very similar to question 6 above. Remember, Glaucon thinks that people only act justly because of the good consequences it brings them. In other words, he thinks that being just is an instrumental good. An instrumental good is one that is good because of the things that it will bring about rather than a thing itself. So a good example, someone behaves bravely or kindly not because they want to be kind or brave, but because they want to have the reputation of being kind or brave. Now, Socrates agrees that justice has an instrumental component to it. However, he also thinks it is an innate good. In other words, it is something that you would do because it is inherently good. It is good for its own sake. You would simply want to do the right thing because it is the right thing and not because it is something that will give you some type of benefit in the future. So that's the point on which they disagree, and that's really the answer to the question. Number 12, what is Plato's notion of justice, and how does it relate to the city-soul hypothesis? Make sure you answer both. Plato thinks that justice is harmony, namely that a just individual is one who has the right parts in the right order. Similarly, the just state is the one in which the right people, easy for me to say. The just state is the one which has the right people doing the right things. So this requires a little better explanation than I have there. But the city-soul hypothesis states that a certain type of place makes a certain type of person. Plato thinks that you can construct a just state which will then, by virtue of the city-soul hypothesis, produce the right sort of people, right? So the harmonious state with the parts in the right places and right proportions produces the just individual, which has the right parts in the right order. What is the city-soul hypothesis? How does it relate to Plato's major project in the Republic? Provide an example from the Watchmen of this general principle. So we have a veritable repeat of our first answer, right? City-soul hypothesis, a certain type of place leaves its mark on you. And so Plato's goal, his project in the Republic, is to create a just place which produces just individuals. Now, an example of the Watchmen of this general principle. Here we're talking about the city-soul hypothesis. So what you would want to talk about, I think, in this case would be Rorschach. Now, Rorschach lives in a society which he considers to be immoral, right, or somehow corrupt. But he's very much a product of this society, right? And so when people look at Rorschach's actions, they may consider him to be immoral, right? He doesn't, for instance, obey the law, and he uses deadly and lethal force, when he has no right to. So the claim here is that you could at least make the argument that Rorschach is the product of where he lives, because he acts in these ways, right? He's outside of the law, and that's because he lives in a state which is itself somewhat lawless or lacking in moral fiber. Now, to be sure, Rorschach would disagree with that, and some, pro-Rorschachians out there would disagree, but it's just an example for purposes of the class. Okay. I'm not going to the mat on that. What is Plato's tripartite division of the soul? How does it relate to his notion of justice? So a repeat of what has come before. Plato believes that there are three parts of the soul. Remember, you're telling me about the soul, so be specific. Reason, spirit, and appetite, or you can say appetitive. This relates to his notion of justice in a straightforward way. Justice in the soul takes place when a person has these parts in the right order. Reason must govern spirit, which in turn governs our appetites. Okay. What is Plato's tripartite division of the soul? How does it relate to Plato's ideal state of Calliope? So again, the same thing, Callipolis. The same exact question here. Now, similarly, the just state of Calliope, with a little bit added on. Similarly, the just state of Calliopolis is the one which has its parts in the right order, namely the guardians govern the auxiliaries, which in turn govern the workers, right? So just as the soul has three parts, the ideal state will have three parts, and those parts will be ordered in a similar fashion. What are the four major reforms of the Republic discussed in class? People usually talk about three waves of reforms in the Republic, but we're just going to delineate or enumerate four here. Four we discussed in class are education, censorship, the noble lie, no private property, and coeducation for the guardians. Okay, Plato proposes a radical, at least in dealing with censorship, educational system for the guardians, and this system is intended to make the guardians just. And I'm going to take out by their nature. That just sounds funny. So remember, he's going to limit their exposure to the arts, and this will prevent them from becoming too fiery and so forth. So, so Guardians Auxiliary will not have access to the arts, and the idea here is that it prohibits people from growing in the wrong way. The noble lie, so that's where we were for the first reform. Second point, the noble lie is the claim that the flesh of the guardians has been mixed with the precious metals of the earth. The noble lie is to prevent the guardians from using or possessing precious metals on their own. Okay, so again, this is to keep the guardians from possessing gold or gems and so forth, because it will taint or make less pure the divine gold which is within them. And this is to prohibit them from accumulating possessions, or at least gold. This is related to the second point, which is no private property. This will keep the guardians from acting against the best interests of the state and in their own interest. So the idea here is that because people won't be accumulating their own objects, they won't be likely to sell their power or abuse their power to obtain those objects, because they can't have anything really private of their own. The coeducation for the guardians entails that both men and women are equally suitable for political positions within this ideal state. However, it should be noted that Plato adds the further contention that in all ways women are inferior to men. So it's true that he has coeducation for the guardians and so forth, but there is that second line, so it's not a blank slate, but he does allow for coeducation of the guardians. What is the noble lie Plato discusses will exist in the state of Calliope? So this is just what we discussed before. The noble lie is the claim that the flesh of the guardians has been mixed with the precious metals of the earth. This is to prevent the guardians from using or possessing precious metals on their own. What is the role of the nuclear family in this ideal state? There isn't one. There is no nuclear family in Callipolis. And that's so that your love and your bond is to the state, not to any particular group of individuals. So you can imagine what Plato has in mind here. Think of the love that you have for your parents or those people whom you call family. I mean, your siblings and so forth. That bond, Plato wants that bond to exist. He wants it to exist with regard to the state, not just individuals. What is the role of women within the republic? Does Plato consider men and women to be equal, or women and men to be equal? I wanted to reverse the order there. The coeducation for the guardians entails that both men and women are equally suitable for political positions within this ideal state. Although Plato seems to allocate political offices equally within the state, it should be noted that Plato adds the further qualification or contention that women are inferior in ways to men. And last, what does Plato think the role of private property is in the life of the guardians? Make sure to explain how this policy is thought to benefit the entire state. Plato abolishes private property for the guardians. This will benefit the state because guardians will be less likely to act in their own interest for the sake of accumulating. This should be possessions. That is, the guardians would be less likely to sell or abuse their power for the accumulation of private goods. Okay, so we are almost through. We have another 9 or so left, and I hope this video was helpful.